Post the callers. Honor the callers. 2. Please be seated.
Please join me in this remembrance time. Gracious and Sovereign One, on this 29th of May, we focus our minds upon our many blessings as a nation and for the high cost of those blessings. This is a day of solemn remembrance as we consider the sacrifices made on the wild seas and the hostile beachheads, in mud-filled valleys and on high icy mountains, in rubble-strewn cities and the dry desert sands. Our comrades left us in the midst of their vigor and youth, long before the waning years of old age. Grant us then the courage this hour to wholeheartedly face the absence of our brothers and sisters. Grant us the presence of soul to honorably and faithfully remember their ultimate sacrifices. Amen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Squires, and I'm a representative of the Veterans of Foreign War, Post 2713, which is located just across the street from the American Legion Post 160, of which I'm also a member.
Hi, Ben.
I wanted to thank the American Legion for inviting us, and also Forest Lawn for inviting us. And also I wanted to recognize there's a gentleman that I just met today that's a World War II veteran that is seated the fourth row back. I don't know, is he able to stand? Okay, well, he's standing there, or he's sitting there, they're pointing to him, so anyway. I wanted to give a couple of stories about some people that have died. One I knew and one I didn't. This was getting back to around June of 1951. And I was home with my mother and two younger brothers. And I had two older brothers that had served in World War II, and they were off working along with my father, who was working. And my third oldest brother, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps around 1946. And that's when he enlisted, and then he re-enlisted. So he was serving his second tour, if you will. He was over in Korea. And my next oldest brother was 10 years older, and he had just joined the Marine Corps, and he was stationed in Camp Pendleton. And the brother that was in Korea, his name was Walt, he wrote a letter home saying he was very proud that my brother Al joined the Marine Corps. And so sometime during that month, and our house was, it was about 30 feet away from the curb, so you could hear a car pulled up. And two Marines started walking toward the door, and we looked to see if one of them was Walt, and it was not. And the two Marines, and some of you may know what's going to happen next, is my mother was handed a telegram, and it didn't have quotation, but they had an equal sign that started this telegram and an equal sign that ended the words of this telegram. And it said, "Deeply regret to inform you that your son, Sergeant Walter Lewis Squires, USMC, was killed in action 2 June 1951 in the Korean era in the performance of his duty in service of his country. No information available at present regarding disposition of remains, temporary burial. In locality where death occurred probable, you will promptly be furnished any additional information received. Please accept my heartfelt sympathy. Letter follows, unquote, or equals. M.H. Silverton, Lieutenant General, USMC, Acting Commandant of the Marine Corps." So it is difficult to explain the emotions, especially from my mother, who broke down and couldn't stand, and she had a real tough time, as you might imagine, if anybody's gone through those types of experiences. And it's painful to always lose a son or a daughter. So what happened is she had some difficulty. We had rotary phones at the time, so I had to use the rotary phone to call my father, who was at work. And of course, in those days, it took a while because, you know, there was like one phone at the factory, and they had to go round them up. So he came home, and, you know, the ripples of his death affected our family for a long time. In fact, it probably still does. So anyway, the remains didn't come, so my brother Al, who was in Camp Pendleton, I believe, or possibly San Diego, I don't remember, but he was asked to go up to San Francisco to accompany my brother's remains, which this was months later. And as the telegram said, it was he was going to be buried. He was going to be buried somewhere in the area where he was killed. So anyway, he went to meet him at in San Francisco, the casket of my brother, and had to accompany him because we lived in Indiana, so it was a 2,000-mile train journey. So that was kind of one experience of what happens when you have a loved one lost in the field of battle. Another one, another thing I want to tell you about is about 15 years later, I was a forward observer in Vietnam. And I was not necessarily stationed with a particular group. They always had me, hey, you go out with them or go out with them. And for those who may not know what a forward observer is, they're a person that goes out with the infantry, and if you get into some trouble, you call in some fire, heavier duty fire. So we were out on this search and destroy. So they sent me out this one day in June. on the search and destroy mission, and about 30 feet away, there was a big explosion, and we all hit the deck, and there was a radio man. He was a radio man for the company commander. He got hit pretty heavy. He absorbed most of that one round, and probably a medevac chopper came about 15 minutes later, but he ended up dying. And so here was a person I did not know, because they put me with this, and he got killed, and he was 19 years old. He was engaged to be married, and he had less than 1 month to go before he went home. So real tragic, you know. You're somebody that didn't even start his life. Anyway, these are two things that I wanted to recall, that share with you, and it's hard to imagine when you look at all these different graves and monuments and these 24 by 12 inch brass plates that are in some of the cemeteries, or these granite or these crosses that are out of all these veterans. It's just hard to think of all of those people and how each of them have a story. So anyway, I wanted to just thank you, and may God bless all of the fallen U.S. soldiers.
First of all, thank you all very much for taking the time to come out today. Appreciate it very much. My name is Keith Hughes. I'm the commander of the American Legion Hall in West Seattle. I get blank looks sometimes when I say that, so I have to say that's the big ugly red building with the cannon in the front yard. Now you all know where it is. So that's where I am. In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. In the sky the lark, still bravely singing, flies, scarce heard amidst the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved. Now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. That poem was written about 4 years before the U.S. entered World War I. The war had already been going on. There had already been thousands and thousands of casualties before we entered the war. Last evening I watched a documentary. It was a public broadcasting PBS documentary called Hallowed Ground. It's the first time I'd seen it, though it was made about 6 years ago. It's a program about American military cemeteries in other countries. There are 23 World War I and World War II American cemeteries in England, France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, Italy, Tunisia, which is North Africa, and the Philippines. Many people are aware of the famous ones, like the one at Normandy overlooking Omaha Beach, and Flanders, about which the poem was named after the original burial ground, which was actually just a farmer's field. Not many people are aware of the other 22 American military cemeteries in 8 different countries. Each of these commemorative places is powerful and unique. It has its own story to tell. Some have less than 1,000 graves, some have over 15,000 graves. Though these cemeteries were created and are maintained by the U.S. government through the American Battle Monuments Commission, they are permanent memorial sites built to stand the test of time. Collectively, they contain the remains of 125,000 Americans. There are an additional 94,000 names on walls commemorating the missing. The Philippine Memorial contains the names of 36,000 sailors that were lost at sea when their ships were sunk. Dignified and serene, they were celebrated, created to honor American fallen. But they are also intended to inspire and teach the living. Each cemetery contains tales of courage and unselfish service to the comrades of our country. Some of the fallen profiled in the program are well known. The poet James Kilmer, the band leader Glenn Miller, the 5 Sullivan brothers, General George S. Patton, but most are ordinary men and women caught up in the calamity of war. These military cemeteries also personify American diversity, and the program includes portraits of many of the African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Japanese Americans, Native Americans, Anglo Americans who were immigrants from Europe and ended up back there during the war. And they are all buried together. I was most taken by the people in the cities and the towns and the villages that are nearest these grand memorials. They treat the places with utmost reverence. They take their children there. The schools take all the children's classes there. And every trip is treated as a sacred educational opportunity to convey what these grounds represent. That each white cross represents the life of a person who came from another country to fight for the protection and the restoration of freedom in their country. Though the U.S. government provides funds to maintain these facilities, in many of these towns there are people who adopt individual grave sites. They visit the graves on a regular basis, not just once a year on Memorial Day. They place flowers and flags, and they tell their children about the sacrifice represented by each and every marker. It's for these heroes that we gather today. It's for these men and women that made the supreme sacrifice in a war that America entered 1 century ago. It was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. Tragically, it wasn't. Just last month, on April 8th, our nation lost Staff Sergeant Mark DeAlencar of the 7th Special Forces Group. He left behind a wife and 5 children. Mark's uncle remembers his determination when he was training to become a Green Beret. The Army told him he had to lose some weight. So Mark put on a backpack, he put bricks and books in the backpack, and you could see him running up and down the road to get in shape so he could re-enlist and become a Green Beret. DeAlencar wasn't just training to wear a uniform. The Edgewood, Maryland native was training to protect our freedom, and that's exactly what he was doing when he gave his life while fighting ISIS in Afghanistan. Unlike world wars, the end of the conflict since have not been marked by treaties or celebrated by ticker tape parades. The end of the war on terrorism will be even less obvious. Again, there will be no surrender treaty signed aboard a battleship or in a diplomatic conference room. While wars today may be less defined, one fact is crystal clear. U.S. men and women still die on foreign soil to protect others. Fortunately, we still have men and women of the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, doing all that they can to protect us and to protect decency and human rights wherever they are threatened. It is us to remember this sacrifice. Long after the battlefield guns have been silenced and the bombs stop exploding, the children of the fallen warriors will still be missing a parent. Spouses will still be without their life partners. Parents will continue to grieve for the heroic sons and daughters that died way too early. We need to be there for them, not just the members of the American Legion and the veterans of foreign wars families, but as American citizens. Nobody can replace these fallen heroes, especially in the eyes of their families. But we can offer shoulders to cry on. We can offer assistance with educational expenses and assurance that their loved one's sacrifice will not be forgotten. That sacrifice is often made as servicemen, men and women, perform humanitarian missions that benefit innocent civilians in far-off lands. Captain Mary Teresa Klinker was a flight nurse assigned to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines when her C-5A Galaxy crashed outside of Saigon. She was evacuating Vietnamese orphans. This mission was called Operation Baby Lift, and Captain Kilmer died for her country at age 27. As our service members protect other people's orphans, they sometimes must leave their own grieving children behind. Little things that I took for granted when you were here seemed priceless now, 14-year-old Jessica wrote to her father, Command Sergeant Major James Bleckenbecker, 2 days after he was killed in Iraq. I will miss you, Daddy, with all my heart. Most of those who die in war are young. The average age of the 125,000 service members buried in those 22 cemeteries overseas is 20 years old. Whether teenage troops or commanders, we do know that they left us too early. But what they lacked in time, they made up for in valor. Selfless bravery is not gained with experience, but with an innate quality that is instilled into character, a process that usually involves strong parents and strong siblings. It's these special families that produce the outstanding men and women who have given everything for our freedom. These families are the fabric of our nation. Our fallen have given what Lincoln called their last final measure of devotion. They did it to serve America. They did it to serve us. Let us live up to that level of service and sacrifice by promoting peace and understanding, by loving our neighbors and our communities, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. May God bless the families of the fallen servicemen and women, and God bless you for being here to remember them.
Prepare to retire the colors. Retire the colors.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty, above the fruited plain. Amen. crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, whom more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining